Well, decision-making under pressure, ladies and gentlemen. I've got some good news for you, and I've got some even better news for you. The good news is that I know everybody who's here listening to me now already is very good at making decisions under pressure. The even better news is that over the course of the next 19 and a half minutes, I'm going to teach you some tricks so you can become even better at making decisions under pressure. But before I even get into my spiel, I would like everybody here to thank that man, the MC, Mr. Rob Salisbury over there. He's worked tirelessly all day introducing people. No one ever thanks the MC. Well done, Rob. Thank you very much. Now, as Rob said, and here's a small fact that some of you, I know, you're thinking, but you're not game enough to say, not many men my height can actually say they've been the tallest man on earth. So for 10 minutes in 2012, I stood on the summit of Mount Everest. But really, the Mount Everest journey does not define me. It is just one journey in many, many journeys that I've done around the world. I'm into exploratory, human-powered adventure. And through the course of 20 years of making these extreme expeditions, the success and failure is completely focused around the ability to make decisions under pressure. I've been with teams who have made great decisions when we're in pressure situations. I've been in teams where we've made very poor decisions in critical situations. And unfortunately, I've watched people die from the decisions that they made. So decision making under pressure that I'm sharing with you today is not theoretical research. It is pure experience that I'm going to share with you. And I would like to start with two stories, two very short stories, to show you how we make decisions under pressure. The first story is from this photograph here, which very nearly was the last photograph I ever took in my life. Because as I put the camera back into my pocket, I was climbing a mountain in New Zealand with my teammate here. As I put the camera back into my pocket, he fell off the mountain. And we were roped together. And the rope was not attached to the mountain. It's a highly controversial way of climbing. It's very fast, but it's very dangerous, because if one of you slips, you rely completely on the other person to catch you. So he slipped off this side of the mountain. And the theory, when this happens, is that the other climber has to throw himself off the opposite side of the mountain to balance the fall and stop that climber falling. Otherwise, he will pull both of you off the mountain to your death. It's 1,000 vertical meters down each side of here, so a fall here is absolutely fatal. I heard him scream, I looked up, and without thinking whatsoever, I jumped off the other side of the mountain. And I just managed to catch his fall and save both of our lives. Story number one. Story number two is a little bit embarrassing to me. Do we have any ladies in here who have ever given birth? Do we have any women who have children? Yes. Yeah, okay. Please don't think bad about me after I share this story with you. There's my wife, Stephanie. We have two twin daughters, Kate and Rachel. They are now 2.5 years old, but they did not come into this world in a very orderly fashion. They were born by emergency cesarean section, 2 weeks before the actual planned birth date. So what happened is my wife was rushed into hospital, into the operating theatre. I was rushing very quickly behind her. Everything was a massive panic. I sat outside the operating room as she was taken in and prepared for the surgery, and I was brought in at the last moment. And as they led me into the operating room, I'm completely out of my comfort zone. I walked around the front of the bed and I saw far too much. I saw a great deal of blood, okay, which was actually dripping onto the floor. And by the time I sat at her head with her, she was still conscious, okay, I was completely out of my comfort zone. And she said these words to me. She started crying when she saw me, and she said, "I can feel what they're doing." And do you know what I did? Do you know what my reaction was? Much to my embarrassment, I froze. I completely froze. And for the next 2 or 3 minutes, it happened very, very quickly. 2 beautiful little babies were brought into the world. And as it turned out, she couldn't actually feel what they were doing. She could feel her feet, which I found out later, which was common when you have an epidural in this kind of condition. So she was okay. She wasn't actually feeling the pain. But the reason I tell you the story is because I froze. Now, why do I share these 2 particular stories with you? First, I need to explain very briefly how our brain works when we make decisions. Your brain uses, this is a little bit simplified, but I don't have much time. Your brain basically will use one of 2 systems when it makes decisions. It will use your limbic system, and especially your amygdala, which is the seat of your emotional responses. Today I'm just going to call it the emotional part of your brain. The other system is the prefrontal cortex, which is the cognitive part of your brain. This is the thinking part of your brain. When you're listening to me at the moment, you're using your thinking part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex. Now, you can't use both of these systems together. Your brain flicks between one or the other. It either uses the thinking part or the emotional part. And when you get so loaded with so much pressure, that's when you start using the emotional part of your brain. You stop actually thinking and you start reacting with pre-programmed survival traits from thousands of years. And when you use this part of your brain, typically you react in 3 ways. You either fight the situation, you flight, you run away from the situation, or you freeze. Typically those are the 3 things you do. Now, when you use your prefrontal cortex, it's completely different. When you think, you have a wide perception. You have a higher ability to solve problems. You get more creative. And also, you become much more collaborative at finding solutions with others. Now, let me ask you a question. In the business world, in the HR world, which part of the brain do you think you should be using to make critical decisions? This one or this one? It's pretty obvious, isn't it? Now, the reason I told you those 2 stories at the start was because both of those 2 stories, I was in an incredible amount of pressure. The first one, when I fell off the mountain, my limbic system kicked in and I fought. I jumped off the other side of the mountain and I stopped it. I fought to survive. When I was in hospital with my wife and I was so overloaded, I froze. And this is the problem with the limbic system, with the emotional part of your brain. If you're using it to try and solve critical problems, when you're having an argument with somebody, when you're getting emotional, when you're under stress, money issues, time constraints, deadlines, etc. If you start using this part of your brain, you cannot think strategically, you cannot think critically, and you become very non-collaborative. Not the way we want to do. Okay, so we got all that out of the way. The question then becomes, so how do we make better decisions under pressure? I'm going to give you 3 steps now how to do that. And I run half-day, 1-day, 2-day workshops training people to make better decisions under pressure. So I'm giving you a very, very small glimpse of this over the course of the next 12 minutes. Step number 1, what we have to do for a start is reduce the amount of pressure we're under. And what do I mean by that? You remember when I said we're under so much pressure, your limbic system kicks in? You can't make decisions with your limbic, with your emotional system. We need to find a way to reduce the amount of pressure we're under. And you say, well, how do you do that? I have no control over pressure. Yes, you do. You do have control over pressure. Pressure is a feeling. That's all it is. So, the first thing you can do is have a toolkit of pressure release valves. A pressure relief valve is just a tool that you can bring out of your box in a certain situation which allows you to release the pressure you're under. I spent 17 years in the world of sales. Everyone in this room has been in a situation where they've seen a salesman use a pressure release toolkit. This is what happens. You're having that negotiation with the salesman. Okay, and you really want to buy that product and you're forcing him down and you're asking him for more discounts. And you ask him for that final discount and he says, you know what? I would love to give it to you at that price, but I don't have the authority. I've got to go and check with my boss. And out he goes. He checks his Facebook, he has a cigarette, calls his girlfriend, calls his wife, whatever, okay? Then he comes back in. But 9 times out of 10, he never checks with his boss, right? He's using that to lessen the pressure. So having a toolkit of things when you're dealing with people, not to force yourself to make decisions at that critical time, just gives you enough time to breathe. One of my friends says, take 60 seconds, take 120 seconds, just to sit there and breathe deeply, which the oxygenation and the blood and the calmness and the peacefulness, etc., will actually help you get more into a cognitive state. But the most successful method that I've ever found to reduce the amount of pressure we're under is this. It's to get a rope, it's to hang it on a tree, and then it's to abseil 50 meters off a cliff into a lake. Now that's a picture of me abseiling in Singapore. I don't recommend you do this because later on after I did this I found out it's highly illegal. But I tied my rope to a tree and I'd make this big free hanging abseil over and over and over again. And the reason I did this is because I'm scared of heights. And the reason I was trying to get used to heights is because I was going to climb Mount Everest. And this is a photograph I took on Mount Everest. It's not 50 meters to fall if you fall here. It's 3,000 meters all the way to the bottom. So I have found over the years that to reduce the pressure, if you can put yourself into the situation or a simulated experience as close as possible to the actual situation you'll be in, you get much more capable of being able to deal with the pressure. It's the same with public speaking. It's the same with dealing with people in conflicting situations. I'm coaching a lady now in Australia, an HR professional who is having a lot of challenges dealing with people in an organization who ask her silly questions all day. And she keeps getting angry with them and emotional. And that starts a chain reaction, which 6 months later has not stopped. It's just snowballed and got worse. So during our coaching session, in the space of 20 to 30 minutes, we actually simulate. I ask her lots of silly questions, okay? And we put her on the spot and we get her used to this. And it's amazing the amount of advancement she makes in the space of 20 or 30 minutes, just by getting used to the situation. The second tip that I'm going to give you today, and this is also something I find from coaching. When people are making decisions that I coach, I find the ones that are not clear on their purpose in life, the ones that are not clear on their values, have the most difficulty making the big decisions. Okay? And sometimes they flop and change their decisions 180 degrees. From one coaching session one week, they're heading in this direction, we talk about it, we set strategies, we fix everything. The next week, they've changed their mind and they've turned in a different direction. So having clear purpose and values is extremely, extremely helpful. But from those first 2 steps that I've shared with you just now, okay, releasing the pressure, having purpose and values, okay, they help. But the thing that really helps the most to improve your effectiveness at making decisions under pressure is this: practice. Practice, practice, practice. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of practice in the last remaining 10 minutes of this session, or 8 or 9 minutes. I'm taking these 2 scenarios from a real expedition which I started last year in January the 3rd, 2017. This expedition has a budget of $400,000. And I made a journey from Singapore all the way to New Zealand, 12,000 kilometers, using no engines, no sails, purely a rowing boat and a bicycle. Okay, so a massive, massive project. No one's ever rowed a boat from Singapore to Australia before. This is true exploratory adventure. And I had so many critical decisions to make on this. The first decision that I had to make was who else was I going to bring in my boat with me for the first stage of the journey. 3 months of rowing on a tiny little 2 by 1 meter square where you row 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 7 days a week, week after week, month after month after month, not coming back into shore, eating, sleeping, talking, going to the toilet, doing everything in front of the other person. Very stressful situations. I had 3 people to choose from after 6 months of searching. recruitment question. 3 people to choose from. The first person, 54 years old, very close friend of mine. Completely reliable. I trusted my life 100% with this guy. But he had to learn some new skills for the expedition. He'd never rowed a boat before, and he's very resistant to change. That's option 1. Option number 2, an Olympic hero. This guy had been to the Olympics as a rower. Okay? He was famous in the country he came from. He would bring a whole network of sponsors, hundreds of thousands of dollars of sponsorship to the expedition. Very strong. But I couldn't get his commitment. He was very fickle and he was very disorganized. And the third option was a very young guy, 26 years old, never been on an expedition, never tried under pressure before, but had a good attitude in terms of wanting to get involved and wanting to learn. Who would you choose on the boat, ladies and gentlemen? I'm going to give a copy of my book to one person who will tell me who they'll choose on the boat. You put your hand up there. Sorry, who would you choose?
I will choose the third person.
The third person. And why is that?
I think having a positive attitude and willingness to learn is very important.
Thank you very much. What's your name?
Ping Song.
Oh, thank you very much for that. You choose the third person based on attitude. I have one more question to ask you. Sorry we don't have time for this. We can talk more about it later. If you get in the aeroplane, right? And just as you're about to take off, the pilot says to you, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have you on board. Look, I've never flown this thing before, but I've got a great attitude, and I'm really looking forward to reading the manual just after takeoff. Would that make you happy?
No.
Yeah, okay. So it's interesting, but you choose attitude, and do you know what? Do you know what decision I chose? I'll tell you if you do my workshop. For 78 days, we rowed the boat through Indonesia, pirate-infested waters, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, through lightning storms, through intense heat, till our skins started falling off our bodies, until we arrived in Darwin after 3 months. And I got on my bicycle and I rode 45 days across the outback of Australia until I reached the east coast of Australia. 150 days last year of traveling by my own human power. And then I had one of the biggest decisions to make to finish off the expedition, and that was how to cross the Tasman Sea to my home country of New Zealand. 2 options to cross the Tasman Sea I had. The first option, the safe route. Slightly less rough. The water's not so cold, but the problem is the wind blows all different directions and I can't row my boat against the wind. Or the second option was to take the dangerous route down south, where the seas are very rough. It's very cold. If I fall out of the boat, I'm dead in a few hours. But the wind blows generally in the right direction. What option would I choose? I thought about this for a long time. I looked at how many people had tried this before, and I found one guy who had tried it before in this very small kayak. And this is a short video of what the sea conditions were like for him on that option number 2.
My father was in the Navy, and I told him that he was going to try and paddle a kayak to New Zealand, and his face just went ashen. And I said, "What's going on, Dad?" And he said, "I was there in a naval boat once, and this boat's antenna is 30 metres above the water level. And when the 2 destroyers were in the troughs of the waves, we couldn't see the antenna of the other boat." So the size of swells that you get out there is enormous. It's cold water, it's big swells, it's wild winds. It's a very intimidating piece of the world to be out there on your own.
So yes, I'm definitely going for option 1, the safe option. So there I go. 5 months ago, I set off in my rowing boat by myself, and I row for day after day after day, for week after week after week. And the sea's rough, and I'm smashed to pieces. My boat is damaged. We're tipped upside down 500 kilometers offshore. And do you know what? I can't fight that wind. After 13 days, I get blowing south like that. After another 8 days, I get blowing hundreds of kilometers north. And then on day 24, I finally get blown back into Australia, my tail well and truly between my legs, further away than where I even started from. What's the moral of this story for me? I didn't make the right decision to cross the Tasman. With the final and most important decision I had to make, my decision was so biased right from the start, okay? And it's something called confirmation bias. I looked for every reason I could find to do the safe route because I was scared of the bottom route. And every reason for the bottom route, I chose to ignore. Subconscious bias and decision making. I'm going back in 3 months, ladies and gentlemen, to try and finish this expedition. Guess what decision on what route I'm going to take in 3 months' time? The southern route. So please wish me luck. Thank you. Thank you. Luck's good. So ladies and gentlemen, that's all I've got time for today. Just a very brief recap on what I've said. Decision making under pressure. It really is all about reducing that amount of pressure so we're not using our emotional part of our brain. The second thing, the second key point there was really a strong purpose and strong values will help you very much when you're under pressure. And the third one is practice. If you are here, are leaders in charge of teams, etc., it's your duty to get those people as much preparation and practice so when they get into the real world situations, they will perform effectively. There is no excuse not to train your people in environments which are safe. You still put pressure on them. They can be simulations, they can be simulated experiences. You're still under pressure, but the consequences of them making those decisions are not fatal. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.